This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. Before I jump into my guest today, since I know people find this podcast for the first time in 2017, even though I got episodes going back to 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16. And look, if you're new, go back in time. Check them all out. It's not like I all of a sudden got good in 2017. That sounded a little cocky, huh? I'm not being cocky. I'm just saying I've carefully curated content on this podcast for a long time. And for those of you brand new, real simple, trendfollowingradio.com. All the episodes, boom, boom, boom. There's an RSS feed, or you can go on iTunes. Find them all on iTunes. And to even get more specific, especially where I'm going to go with my guest today, I want you to check out at my main website. Go to this link, trendfollowing.com/behavior. What will you find there? A full listing, well, at least it's a full listing as of maybe about a year ago, a full listing of my guests that bring a certain psychological perspective to my show. That list includes Nobel Prize winners, Daniel Kahneman, Vernon Smith, Angus Deaton, Robert Aumann. Also on this list, very, very well-known members of the psych space. That includes Gerd Gigerenzer, Charles Faulkner, Laurie Santos, Colin Kammerer, Dan Ariely, Anders Ericsson, Stephen Kotler, Brett Steenbarger, Hersh Schefrin, Van Tharp, Robert Greene, Philip Tetlock, Barry Schwartz, Gabrielle Oettingen, Spiros Makrodakis, Paul Slovic, Donald McKenzie, Peter Gray, Thomas Gilovich, Christopher Chabris, Daniel Simons, William Ury, Jonathan Fader, Barbara Fredrickson. That is a list of some of the damn brightest people on the planet when it comes to looking at our behavior. I feel like I've been in grad school now for, I guess, my 5th or 6th year of this podcast. I absolutely love it. I feel so fortunate to have a list of those people on this show. Now look, I make evergreen content. You can go back and listen to those episodes. They are standalone. It doesn't make a difference the year or the month. I don't care. Again, trendfollowing.com/behavior. One last housekeeping issue. If you've not yet picked up my new April 2017 edition of Trend Following, please do. It is twice as big as the 2009 edition, completely updated, almost every word augmented, rewritten, expanded. It is the beast of the trend following space. My guest today adds to the psych perspective that I love to bring on this show. Her name is Laura Doyle, best-selling author of The Surrendered Wife. Today we discuss her newest book, The Empowered Wife. Now, before you go jumping to conclusions that this might not be for you or you think you don't need this, give me a break. I only bring people on this show that bring a certain practicality. And I like that when it comes to the subject of relationships, Laura gets practical. Because let's face it, relationships are a disaster in the modern age. Divorce rates are through the roof. Cheating is through the roof. Laura gives a perspective. She gives tools that we can all use for better relationships. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Laura Doyle. So, Laura, I got to give you a quick intro, the male perspective, my male perspective, before we jump into your work. So you have a feeling for the interviewer who is going to be asking you questions. So I remember in the late 1990s, I had problems with a girlfriend. I reached for John Gray's famous book, Mars, Venus. And I thought that really gave me a lot of insights at the time. I don't know what happened. Something just went to the wayside. I don't remember picking it up again. It's still in my library. At some point in time after that, I remember picking up Neil Strauss's The Game. I thought that was terribly interesting, going from Gray talking about the psychological differences between male and female. And here's Strauss going down the path, revealing how men are using these psychological differences to their advantage. Just the other day, well, first off, we had the Google guy who wrote this 10-page paper for Google talking about differences between men and women. And the other day, I just happened to email with my sister's friend, who is a romance author, fairly well known, has done quite well. And I asked her about her audience. And she said, Michael, my audience are women with beta husbands who want to find the exciting alpha. One more point to add to that. I'm also in the middle of reading a book that someone had me grab off the internet called The Rational Male, which also gets at a lot of these differences, but is more in the vein of Neil Strauss's book. So all these different things have been coming across my plate. And then I see your world. And I'm like, I start to go through your work, and it's not written the same way as some of the things that I've just mentioned, and you're appealing more to women directly. But I'm still seeing in your work that there's these differences between men and women. Now, I say all of that, but there's this undercurrent in society today to say, hey, there are no differences. We're all the same. There's no differences. Man, it's a minefield out there.
It absolutely is a minefield, Michael. And you're right that there is this undercurrent. And I was actually one of the worst perpetrators of the mythology that men and women are the same, and women are just smaller, less hairy men, but still identical, really. Because I thought that if we admitted that men and women were different, that meant that women would lose in the workplace. But now I see it completely differently. Of course, we have different gifts and strengths, and I thought that those gifts and strengths were not very valuable, and now I see that very differently. But what I bring to the workplace is very different than what a man brings to the workplace, but also quite beneficial. So different, but also valuable. I find it fascinating that you started out with John Gray, and then went to The Game, and then got to the Google memo, and then your friend who's the romance writer. I'm a little sad for her, saying that or I guess for her readers who have beta husbands, apparently, because in some ways, men have a lot of different circles where they get to exercise their alpha. And one of the things that came up for me was like, the man could be an alpha at the basketball court where he plays, or my husband plays guitar and sings and writes songs. He's definitely got that alpha streak. He's a laid back kind of guy, but he used it to get girls, and he got this girl by saying, would you like to hear a song that I wrote? I was like, yeah. So it's really interesting. It's such an interesting introduction to our conversation about the differences between men and women. I see a lot of very distinct differences. One of them is, from what I understand of the male culture, is that respect is like oxygen to men in their intimate relationships. Would you agree with that, Michael?
Yes. If a woman does not she doesn't need to tell me all the time, but if a woman doesn't respect my base way of what I do, how I achieve, how I go about my world, the big picture things that I'm chasing, the lion that I'm trying to kill, if she doesn't respect that, and usually the lack of respect doesn't come from saying I don't respect it, it's usually just kind of marginalizing in some way. Oh, you have to do your work or something like that. Something that just marginalizes my effort. And that, you immediately just feel like, oh, okay, it's just my work.
Exactly. And you did a great job just then actually explaining it from the male point of view, which I have to tell you, even though I've been studying this stuff for a long time and I teach other women about it, it still sounds funny to my female brain, because when we think of respect, we think of something you give to teacher or to your parents or your boss, right? Because you have to respect them, and it's kind of has to do with subservience or obedience or something. Or the other part of the female perspective on respect is that I'll say, well, I think I was pretty respectful. I didn't leave him a mess. I let him know where I was. And it turns out that has nothing to do with what men consider respectful. So it's funny because one of the things that, one of the cheat phrases that I teach women to use in their relationships that yields powerful results, but they all go, oh, do I have to say that? And it's to apologize to your husband for being disrespectful. I apologize when I was disrespectful just then, when I told you that you have to be more patient with kids, right? That would be disrespectful. Or sadly, I had this come up for me just the other night at dinner. When he was telling me about his work, he was talking about some clients, and I said something critical about one of his clients, and immediately his face changed, like, he couldn't believe I just said that. And I said, oh, was that disrespectful? Like as if I didn't know, right? And he goes, yeah. And he was taking me out to dinner, we're having a nice time, and here I just have kind of ruined, there's all this tension in the air now. So I said, you know what, John, I apologize for being disrespectful when I criticized your client just now. And then I stopped, and immediately everything went back to normal. The connection was back. We're having a good time again. It just amazes me the power of that phrase. And women say, God, it just felt like sawdust in my mouth the first time I used it. But then after they've tried it and they see the results of how you can restore the connection so quickly, they're like, it's like honey in my mouth.
We're gorillas that just need to be petted.
Well, no. I think the respect has to be authentic. In order to say those words, my husband has to be worth it to me, right? There has to be some authentic respect in order to muster up. That's much harder, I think, than men realize for women to say. Because it seems like it's so much what you need. The way we want to feel safe and special and desired is a big one. We want to feel adored. Respecting my thinking is just not so high up there for me. And for most of the women that I work with. But him finding me irresistible like a magnet, that's up there.
Let me keep you at my introduction for a moment, because before we get into your work and solutions and get a little more granular or some of the work and the research that you've uncovered, I want to stay at this big picture for a moment about the differences. And it seems like to me, in observing society, that there is this social battle right now. Look, I'm sure I will offend somebody when I say this, but to me, when I see that New York City has 31 different genders they represent now, or they recognize now, your head starts to kind of say, God, I'm in my 40s. Okay, I can't even wrap my arm around that. How are my teenage nephews supposed to wrap their arms around that? I'm really would love for you to give, from your perspective, the playing field. What's going on right now between the sexes, the gender issues. And, this idea that, look, the guy from Google was fired flat out because he said there are some biological differences. And Google management said, no, there's not. You're gone.
Yes.
It's a really crazy playing field right now.
It is a crazy playing field. I read that. I haven't read the memo, but I read an article about the memo. One of the things that stuck out for me was, and the woman who wrote this article had worked in the tech field and really was able to say, look, my experience is that men, one of the men that she was working with in the IT field said, everyone's saying, what did you do for the weekend? And she said, oh, I went to this concert. And she was in a doomed relationship at the time, so she was talking about that. And then one of the guys said, I built a fiber optic network in my basement this weekend. And everyone, oh my gosh, let's talk about that. And she was like, she realized these were not my people. She said, I was never going to waste a weekend building a fiber optic network in my basement. And that was and she said, and if I'm Google, I want to hire those people who are most passionate about this. And she worked with, she said that she could count on one hand over 4 years in the IT business with women that, less than 5 of them and that whole time. So it was mostly male dominated. And there has been this case made that it's just all social conditioning and how we're brought up and things like that. And who knows?
It's not innate. That's the argument. The counter is it's not innate. It's social.
It's social, right? And it's really very difficult to tell the difference between nature and nurture, even in science, even when you're doing things very methodically and carefully. You don't always know exactly where things came from. So it's a big $1 million question about whether that's nature or nurture, but it certainly seems to be so at this time. Now, can it be changed? I mean, I guess that's another $1 million question. But just to observe, gosh, guys seem more interested in engineering than girls do. That sure seems innocent enough to me.
It's just a fascinating topic. Let me keep you at the terms, and I brought them up earlier. I would love for your feedback too. I use the phrase beta and alpha. Of course, these are generalizations. There's distributions on the bell curve. Things are never completely precise, but I think big picture, people kind of get the idea of the beta, which is kind of the guy that is home in his khakis and, is drinking a pink colored wine and just doesn't really seem to have much still to him. Whereas you're talking about your husband who's, a singer. I mean, everybody knows if they could have been Robert Plant or, any other singer of the last 50 years, you guys instinctively know, rock singers and stuff like that, how valuable that is with women. And it's for sure alpha. But speak to these terms, because I really, and I think also I mentioned the romance writer mentioning that, the terms. But women, to me, my perspective, I see this desire for women to want to make me beta, to want to feminize me. But the moment that I act alpha, they're happier.
Well, yeah, I think there's lots to be said for that. So, yeah, what is it about us as women? I mean, this is sadly, here's an embarrassing story. I was really super excited and happy to marry my husband. I thought, man, this guy is so handsome and smart and he's funny. And we laughed together. I can't believe he wants to marry me. He's fantastic. And I was the perfect wife right up until we got married. But then afterwards I thought, well, I'm going to improve him. I'm going to tell him how to be healthier. I'm going to show him how to make a budget, how to dress better, how to be a little more ambitious at work. I'm going to improve my husband. And of course, I couldn't understand why he was avoiding me, but I knew that there must be something wrong with him. So I thought, well, I'll just drag him to marriage counseling, and then the marriage counselor will fix him, and then I will finally be happy. Because I think that's how it works. But of course, it's not how it works. And at marriage counseling, it didn't help. In fact, that's when I became the most hopeless. And I thought, I'm either going to spend the rest of my life in a loveless relationship or I'm going to have to get divorced. And so I was just facing the fact that I had to get divorced, ready to do that. And then I realized that I was too embarrassed to get divorced because people had been to the wedding not that many years before. So I decided in my desperation that I would ask women who had been married for what seemed like an eternity, which was 15 years, what their secrets were. How did they stay married? How did they make their marriages happy? And the things they said didn't even make sense to me. I remember one woman said, well, I try never to criticize my husband, no matter how much it seems like he deserves it. And I said, yeah, have you got anything else? Because I don't know that I could do that. But in my desperation, I did end up making my own marriage a laboratory where I started experimenting with all the things that they told me to do. And if it worked, I kept it. And if it didn't, I threw it out. And I remember I'd been doing this for a little while. And what emerged was what I now call the 6 intimacy skills. And I'd been doing them for a little while. And I remember I walked through the door and my husband's face lit up. And so he was happy to see me again. And that had been gone for a long time. And so I thought, wow, this is working. And it was around that time that I started a little support group in my living room. I couldn't control my husband anymore, but I thought I'll just control my girlfriends. I'll tell them what to do in their relationships. We started to see just miracles in all of the relationships in my little circle of 5. And somebody said, can you write this down for my cousin in Florida, what we're doing? And I said, sure. And that became my first book. When Dateline came out and did an investigative report on the methods, it went to #1 on Amazon and became a New York Times bestseller. It's now 19 languages in 30 countries. And I accidentally started this.
So awesome, huh?
Worldwide.
So awesome.
Yeah, it's crazy. I never dreamed I'd have this big platform just from trying to save my own relationship. But it's turned out to be really gratifying that, relationships are a skill, just like everything else that's worthwhile in life. It's not, I thought, well, we're in love, so obviously, everything will be great. And of course, that wasn't the case. Just like you wouldn't have a kid who turns 16 and just toss them the car keys and say, hey, go take the family car for a spin. No, we say, hey, we need you to learn the rules of the road. We need you to practice driving behind the wheel, and then you can take a test and get a license. But imagine if they did just take the car out for a spin without all of that. They would probably crash, and they'd say, wow, this is really dangerous. And they'd be right. But that's exactly what we do with relationships. There was no relationships 101 at my school. I don't know, was there one at yours?
No, but hey, let me take you back to your marriage counseling story, because you kind of skipped by that. And I would love for you to expand upon it. In your work, I see, and I'm kind of generalizing here, but you position marriage counseling as more of theory. And I think what you just described with what you figured out going down the practical path is where we want to be. But why don't you give some perspective on marriage counseling? Because like you said, that was your worst moment. And here you're with the professionals. This is supposed to be improving you, and things are going downhill. Let people understand that.
Well, I think most people don't realize that according to a study at UCLA by the professors of psychology, 75% of couples who get traditional behavioral marriage counseling are separated within a year. So imagine, what if there was an airline where 75% of the time it crashed? I mean, would anybody ever fly that airline? Of course not. I was slow to recognize that marriage counseling had done us more harm than good, because we went for years and we spent thousands of dollars. So I didn't really want to believe that it had been a waste, but I couldn't figure out how it had helped. And now that I know what contributes to making a relationship amazing, I can see why marriage counseling it's not just benign, it's downright harmful to a relationship. And one of the reasons goes back to this concept of respect we were talking about earlier. One of the first things you do at marriage counseling is you sit down in front of this stranger, this therapist, and you tell them everything that's wrong with your partner. So to do that in front of your husband, knowing that respect is like oxygen, and to now just tell the therapist everything that's wrong with him, it's one of the most disrespectful things you can do. So you're digging your hole deeper. But also, I think, and it kind of shows up in my story too, counseling is a little bit of a hideout for hypocrites. I wasn't going to self-reflect. I was going so that she could fix him. And no relationship ever got better by complaining about each other for an hour a week or by going to fix the other person. And in fact, there's actually no such thing as working on a relationship. Get this. This was mind-blowing to me, that there's only working on myself. And then when I changed, my husband responded to me a lot better. So that's where the magic was for me. I never was in marriage counseling.
One thing I love about your work, the big picture point that you're making, and we're going to keep breaking these things down into a more granular level, but you talk about really across the empowered wife, think about the outcome. What's the good outcome that I desire? But then don't get hung up on every step of the process when, quite likely, possibly, there's more than one way to get there.
Absolutely. You're talking about the training on how to express your desires in a way that inspires. A lot of the 6 intimacy skills are about just simply retraining the way that you do things. So I'll give you another embarrassing story. I've got so many, sadly. But in this one, early in my marriage, what I used to do was I would complain to my husband, John. I'd say, this kitchen is a disaster, John. And he would just hear, blah, 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 John, right? Because men can't really even hear us when we're complaining. And I thought he was going to jump off the couch and start cleaning the kitchen. And let me just tell you, that never happened. Never happened. Totally unsuccessful in that regard. And I tried, begging and pleading and cajoling and all the usual manipulation, everything. I made spreadsheets with, the chores on them. You do this and I'll do that. And those were just routinely ignored. Then finally, it was such a great day when I learned to express my desires in a way that inspires. And it turns out that all men have what I call the hero gene. And you can trigger that hero gene by expressing your desires. In fact, let me ask you this question. I've asked thousands of men this question, but I'd just like to ask you too. Michael, are you a married man or are you single?
I'm single.
Okay. Well, thinking back to previous relationships that you've been in, how important was it to you that she was happy?
It depends on what stage of the relationship, where we were at that point in time. If it was before a conflict had started, then of course, you want to do everything for her. If there is some kind of moment or trigger where the relationship either is having a bad moment or is starting to go down to irreconcilable differences, my perspective about her happiness starts to be like, okay, do I just not have to hear your voice anymore?
That's right. That's right. Exactly. I remember one man saying, if a man speaks in the forest and his wife isn't there to hear it, is he still wrong? So I think there's that it's a common theme. But when I've asked thousands of men this question, and they really all say the same thing. They say that, when they're in a relationship, when they are married or have a steady girlfriend, that if I say, how important is it to you that she's happy? They say, oh, it's the most important thing. It's everything. It's imperative in the UK. They say that. So we see that this hero gene is alive and well. And what you just described beautifully is the process of just kind of completely squashing it through being what I call unpleasable. And if he doesn't think he can succeed in making you happy, eventually, he is going to give up. But it's not too late, as long as you're still in the relationship, to get that back. And this is how you do that, by stating this clear desire. So what happened with the dishes was I finally learned how to do this. And I said, I would love a clean kitchen. And I was like, Eureka! My husband knew what to do to make me happy. So he said, I'll clean it. And he did. And that was about 18 years ago. And he's been doing the dishes at our house ever since. Once he knew how to make me happy, the man trips over himself trying to do enough. And I think it's probably about 100 to 1 in terms of how much I do for him and how much he does for me around here now. And so I find that remarkable because I felt like it was the other way. I was I was the martyred kitchen elf who had to do everything for everybody and never got time for herself before. And now I truly feel like the princess around here. In fact, the other day, I was brushing crumbs off of the counter and he goes, oh, wait, don't move. And he pulled out his phone to start taking my picture like I'm the supermodel that he's been married to for 28 years. So I feel unspeakably grateful to feel so loved every day. It's wonderful for inner strength.
Let me take you to a big picture issue. You got me thinking as you asked me about my status. To ask that question today, you and I know the statistics. So if you ask someone whether they're single or married, it's generally going to be 50% single, 50% married. And if you ask someone who's already been married and got a divorce, it's going to be 75%. It's a mess out there. So what's interesting about your work, though, is even though you have the word wife in your title, when I read through your work, it's not like I'm reading something, oh, this doesn't apply to me. This doesn't apply to the woman in my life. It sure does.
Yeah, that's a good point. It applies. It's so funny because for me, in my experience, women really are the keepers of the relationship. And you'll probably agree with this, I would imagine, because if I want things to be playful and passionate, I can make them that way. And if I want them to be tense and distant and pick a fight, I can make them that way too. And we find it's less so with husbands. And it's partly because of our unique feminine gifts, right? There's 5 unique feminine gifts that we have. And one of them is receptivity, for example. And so if my husband's trying to make me happy and he gets a gift and I say, why did you get me this? This isn't, I don't wear stuff like this, or, there's endless stories from my coaching clients about the time she got a battery recharger for Valentine's Day or something, right? And he's thinking, oh, this will be great. She's always complaining. Her batteries are running out, and he's thinking on a practical level, and she can't believe he got her something so unromantic. But the bottom line is she's not pleasable, and so his hero gene is triggered. He's trying to please her, and she won't be pleased. So we find that receptivity is actually the essence of femininity. And that's part of what, that's the essence of what men are attracted to is femininity. If we are receptive, we become 10 times more attractive to men than we were before, when we're trying to pull our own weight or be independent. And so this is part of the work that we do.
But that's where you get controversial, though, because for you to say that women being feminine is good for the relationship. There's a significant number of women, I can quickly find them, that would probably say on the internet that, like, no, you're giving something away. You're being submissive. Don't do that. It's not equal anymore. And all this other stuff. You said, well, gosh, at the top, you said, well, women are not just a smaller, hairier version of a man, but men are just a hairy version of a gorilla. And we do like feminine. And, there's this crazy, and let me go off my soapbox for a second. For me, as someone who grew up in the 80s, a teen and in college in the 80s, to me, the transition really started to take place in the 80s and 90s, because I think if you look at a lot of what was taking place in the 70s, there was still more of a male, female. It existed more in a natural way. You know where I'm going from here. People can hear me talking, being confused, because we're all confused these days.
This is true. Well, yes, no. I know what you're saying, that in the 70s, right? This was feminism was still nascent, really. It wasn't very well developed yet. We didn't have feminist mothers, right, in the 60s and 70s yet. They were just becoming feminists. And just to set the record straight, I am a feminist. Even though I have a book called The Surrendered Wife, I still want women to have great opportunities in the workplace, as much opportunity as they want to have, and to be able to earn equally. And I think we can all do that from within our feminine power. I don't think I think that was where we went wrong, was thinking, and in fact, I think it's enormously stressful to feel that you have to act like a man when you're a woman, because I don't think we really know how to be men. It's an entirely different gender, totally different culture to me. Yeah, I found it rather uncomfortable, like a round peg in a square hole, to try to be so masculine.
I can't recall conversations in my life with men where they say, well, I want to hold women down. I don't want women to have opportunities. I don't remember those conversations at all. Now, I know there are some cultures and perhaps some religions around the world where that is kind of normal. But, in America, that's not. But it's as I used the phrase at the beginning of this conversation, it is a minefield to dig into. Let me bring up something, though, that I touched on, and you quote her, and I think she's great. She writes she's got a way with the words, and this is Camille Paglia, and I'm taking part of a quote that you put in your book. Gender is arbitrary, oppressive fiction with no basis in biology, meaning, again, back to the social conditioning that we're not born with something. That's a pretty strong statement to put into your work. What had you wanting to put that into your work?
Well, you say you read part of the quote.
Gender is arbitrary, oppressive fiction with no basis in biology. She was being sarcastic about this view out there. She's like, hold on, but gender is part of biology.
Exactly. It is part of biology. Okay, good. And no wonder I was confused. I was thinking you were going to say, there's a quote from her where she talks about how our professors will teach kids in college that there's no difference between the genders, and then that's a fiction. So this is what I was trying to reference in my brain when you were reading that quote. But yeah, absolutely. There is some destiny in your gender. And of course, as you reference all the movements with transgenders and all the different, 51 ways to identify gender in New York City you were talking about, that people are taking that and making their own way with it, and more power to them. But I do think that since women are less interested in building fiber optic networks in their basements than men, on the whole, for the most part, I think we can safely make some generalizations without harming women, without making them barefoot and pregnant and getting only 50 cents on the dollar when they do the same job. So I think that's where the dissonance is. I mean, one of the things that's been really interesting for me to recognize, too, I was on the Montel Williams show once with these 5 couples where the man absolutely turned over his entire paycheck to the woman, and she would either buy what he needed and he had no cash of his own, or she gave him $20 for the week and he had to just figure that out. And these men were all just totally willingly doing this. And I thought, if these genders were reversed, there'd be no end to the wailing and gnashing of teeth. Like, oh my God, he's taking all her money and spending it. And these guys were volunteers, not victims. And I think this happens all over the place. Men seem very willing to support the woman in their life financially, right? They're willing to share their money and provide for her. But I see that women less so. We tend to get a little resentful when we have to support a man, and then he still doesn't clean up after himself, right? So these things kind of get. In fact, it's a bad setup. One of the things that I recommend against is putting a man through school, supporting your boyfriend or your husband through school. I mean, or doing anything for a man that he could do for himself. I think most men prefer to be admired for their competence and their accomplishments than they do to get help. And in the feminine world, one way to connect is, well, how can I help you? And in the masculine world, that's almost an insult.
What the man's view of another man being taken care of by a woman, I mean, there can be no more lack of respect from another man to another man. It's just the bottom of the barrel.
It's the bottom of the barrel. So they lose status, speaking of alphas and betas, from that. But also, it's just I've seen it be so detrimental to the relationship. It's the story of I put him through school and then he had an affair and left me, right? Gosh, I mean, it sounds like a fable. It's told again and again. We see that this is just kind of a bad setup for relationships.
Let me bring you to power for a second, because who has the power in a relationship? And I'm going to give the quick point here, and I want you to expand on it. Who has the power in a relationship? It's the person that can walk away. Generally across the board, I think most people would have to admit that women in a relationship typically have the most power if we're defining it that way.
You really have studied my work, Michael. I'm impressed. Very good. And it's true that up to 90% among college-educated women are the ones that initiate the divorce. Up to 90%. Isn't that just, I was stunned when I read that, but it makes sense to me because men sort of make this decision like, okay, we're married now, that's that. And women, I think, are constantly evaluating, like, what has he done for me lately? And we certainly, there was a study at the University of Toronto also that showed, and I hope you're sitting down for this, Michael, because it's rather shocking news, but they found in their study that women are more emotional than men. So there's some research money that was well spent, right?
I can't believe that. There can't be any truth to that. You jest with me. Come on.
I do. Speaking of, Google memos that state the obvious, right? So it was very interesting to me to realize that that emotionality, we have this emotional brilliance. That's one of our feminine gifts. But the downside of it is that we're more likely to make emotional decisions, including filing for divorce. And because of that, we definitely have more power in the relationship. So and for me, this kind of goes back to what we learned from watching Spider-Man, right? We have all this power in the relationship, and what comes with great power is great responsibility. So I believe that we have a responsibility to learn the skills that lead to feeling desired, cherished, adored, safe, special in our relationships. Because it's kind of like the old song says, the greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return.
Speaking of love, though, in terms of numbers, when it comes to love in a relationship, overall, it's the man that loves the woman more, yes?
Correct. That is absolutely right. He does. He loves her more.
That's daunting as a man to read that in print and just think about it, really. It makes you, it causes pause.
I can imagine, but imagine also the prize, the victory that you, what is it Patton said, accept the challenge so that you can feel the exhilaration of knowing that you have won her and she chooses you and she respects you. There's no better feeling.
Well, this becomes part of, and I mentioned some of these different works at the top of this conversation. There's quite a view out there these days that men should be thinking of themselves as the prize. So it's there again. It's the minefield of men and women today, huh?
I suppose so. I mean, I just make me think of this little, one of those little inside routines that couples have. One of ours. I thought, I've never shared anywhere before, but here you go. There's another embarrassing story. And that is, there's some old Paul McCartney song, I guess, and I'll say to John, sing that song. And he goes, I love you and you seem to like me. And so it really just harkens to what you're just saying about how men love women more. And he's totally happy with that. And so is Paul McCartney, that he loves me more. I think if you ask most couples and they're honest with you, they'll tell you the same thing. He loves her more. So why does that work? How can this possibly work? She has more power. He loves her more. It almost seems like he's one down. The truth is that the yin and yang together are the most powerful. We really do need each other. And that exhilaration comes from having the gender contrast set to high. And when you talk about, maybe I should think of myself as the prize as a man. My husband has shared with me, and I've heard other men say too, it's like when you don't have a girl, it's a constant gnawing. It's a constant okay, I got to go get a girl. That's like there's some inner drive toward that end. And then there's immense satisfaction on the other side of that, can be certainly in a great relationship. And it drives you to try again and again and again. It's just human loneliness is part of the cause, but also just the magnetism that the magnets that women are to men. Right, we're the ones with the tail feathers in our gender. We're the sexier sex. Women are.
Yes, for sure. And I think this also always keeps men, well, unless something has happened, but men get a little concerned about that because, let's face it, other men can be dogs. And so I'm curious your perspective when it comes to relationships. And obviously, there's an epidemic in cheating, because if there wasn't an epidemic in cheating, there would not be so many divorces. And maybe that's not necessarily correlated. But speak to cheating right now. And what does a relationship, does a marriage last after cheating? I mean, what do the numbers say?
There's a lot of infidelity in the world. And I have a biased sample. Of course, my coaching organization serves women who are struggling in their relationships. And so many of them are in crisis, and their husband's having an affair. He has another woman. He's had her for years. And they're trying to figure out, what the heck? I've got 3 kids and I don't want to tear apart this family. And for them, it's 51% good. And not just that, but there's also this acknowledgement that, hey, now that they have learned the intimacy skills, they can look back and see how they were unwittingly disrespectful, controlling, and emasculating. And they have a lot of regret about that. And they want to become their best selves. And the relationship becomes the portal to that spiritual journey. And that certainly has been my experience, that practicing the skills has helped me become a Laura that I'm much happier with. I didn't like hearing myself screech like my mother on her worst day either. I enjoy my own company more, and I've gained a lot of confidence from learning these skills. And so they see the value in taking the difficult path back, right? The humbling path back to being the goddess of fun and light that they were when their husband first fell in love with them, and showing the same admiration that they did maybe when they were dating, right? And it's kind of funny because I think sometimes we think, well, my husband's changed. He's not the man that I fell in love with. And that was true for me. I thought my husband's changed. He's not the man I fell in love with. And yet when I stopped controlling him and started being respectful and pleasable, the man who wooed me returned. And that's what we see happens over and over again. So it's almost never too late. We never say die around here. I'm on a mission to end world divorce by getting as many women as possible these skills, so that whoever wants to have an amazing relationship, and many women, that is their most important thing, that they have the information, the right information. Too many times I read bad relationship advice almost every day. It's the same stuff I heard from the marriage counselor. Like, oh, if your husband's not physically affectionate, then you need to tell him that you have a deep concern about his lack of physical affection. Well, let me tell you, that is not going to get you bedroom eyes or
just take your clothes. Just take your clothes off.
Just take your clothes off. It's so easy to seduce a man, right? But
guys are simple. It's not hard to figure out.
It's not. They aren't. And God bless them. I love that about them. So they're not hard to figure out. They just want us to be happy. They're easy to seduce. I mean, what more could
Thank
we
you.
want,
Thank
right?
you for that. We're easy to seduce. I just say, thank you.
Yes, yes, you're welcome. So, yeah, no, thank you for being easy to seduce it, because it really dovetails. So, I mean, such an elegant system that women want to feel desired and men are just so desirous of us. What could be better?
Let me take you back to a moment. You just said something about skills. And one of the things that I wanted you to elaborate on today, I see this as a male. Many times when I've been in relationships, I feel like at some point in time, perhaps the woman in my life has maybe started to live too much vicariously through me, and she doesn't have her own self. And you use the term self-care, which gets back to something you said earlier in this conversation, which is taking care of yourself, looking after yourself. You can control you. Why don't you speak to the idea of self-care for women for a moment?
Well, it does absolutely go missing. It's so interesting to hear it from the male perspective that she lives vicariously through you. So I had certainly done a certain amount of this too. And what was really fascinating, and I'll totally bring this back around to self-care, but when I stopped being the armchair quarterback of my husband's life and started showing up for mine. So my life is like a car going down the street with no one behind the wheel, right? No one's paying attention. I'm all focused on his life. And as soon as I started focusing on mine, I realized, like, wow, it's way more terrifying to show up for your life than it is to just criticize and take pot shots at someone else's. So I show up for my life, and what happens? I write a book that becomes a bestseller, and I get a lot of hate mail because it's called The Surrendered Wife, and people think I mean obedient wife or subservient wife, and they don't understand that a surrendered wife just acknowledges she can't control her husband, so she doesn't tell him what to dress, or what to eat, or how to dress, or what to do at work. Well, that was terrifying. And then I got to go on national TV, and that was terrifying. And then I got to speak in front of live audiences, and I'd never done any of that before. It was terrifying. Now I have this international. I'm laughing because it seems laughable, but I have this international coaching organization with 30 coaches, and we serve thousands of women every day. And I had no idea how to start that kind of a business. So every day I'm still scared. I'm scared all the time. Self-care was a great way for me to take my focus off of my husband's side of the street and bring it back onto mine. And what I found was there was this really miserable woman who didn't really know what made her happy. And that was a sad situation. And a lot of my clients show up that way too. So when I did start, what I decided to do, I'd heard all about self-love and self-care, and I'd never really understood how you were supposed to do that. I'm like, self-love, what is this? Should I hug myself? I don't know how to know. So for me, everything had to be very practical. And I made up that I had to do at least 3 things a day for my own happiness. And I don't mean 5 fruits and vegetables and 8 hours of sleep. I mean frivolous fun. I'm talking bubble baths. I'm talking meeting a friend for a cup of coffee. I'm talking reading a gossip magazine and having a chocolate eclair. I'm talking manis and petties and massages. And I love to play volleyball, so that's on my list, or sing at the top of my lungs, or, take myself out to sushi. So it was things that just made me feel good. The only value was that I felt delight. So in this way, it forced me gave me structure to take responsibility for my own happiness because, and this is going to sound really obvious when I say it this way, only happy people have happy relationships. There's no other way to do it. I thought it was my husband's job to make me happy. I don't know where I got that idea, but I was waiting around for that. And it turns out that important job is mine.
As you say that, we talk about these differences, but for me, and I mentioned the living vicariously through, what I really was leading to was I think all people, men or women, they want to have achievement. Everybody wants some achievement in their life that's independent of significant other, kids, etc. They want to do their own thing. As you were just talking there, I was thinking of a book that I read years ago by an author named Brenda Yulin, and I think the book was called If You Want to Write. And she wrote this in the 20s or 30s. Essentially what she said was, well, one part of the book was like, look, if you're a woman and you're an author, and she said, you could exchange the word writing for anything. But she said, you know what? You tell the kids, I'm going in the other room. I am working on my book for the next 4 hours. You take care of yourself. Whereas today, I think so many women feel like they just have to take care of everyone else and they don't take care of themselves. And as a male, I see this all the time. And so I become, frankly, excited, perhaps even sexually excited, when I see the woman, and I do yoga. So when I see yoga instructors, watch out. But when I see a woman that is doing something she loves, she's doing something she loves and she's in control, that's sexy.
Absolutely. And what a great thing for women to hear, right? If you really dive into what are your desires. In fact, what story comes to mind? I remember this one couple, they were separated. She came into my program. She started doing self-care because that's the first step. You can't do any of the other intimacy skills if you don't get your self-care in. And for her, it was painting. Painting just really lit her up and she loved it. And she actually decided to enter she started to do an exhibit and she entered some competitions. And one of the first times she reconnected with her husband was him coming to see an exhibit that she had. And she was so scared and so proud that she was actually honoring this part of her, this form of creative self-expression that, where she had a burning desire to do it. And she had not been doing it when they'd been living together. But she did eventually attract her husband back to her. And she says to this day that she felt that, painting brought him back into her life. And it's just what you described. I think he was so much more attracted to this woman who could feel her own passion and honor it.
100%. Hey, as we wind down, let me ask, I know you are fond of John Gray, and I believe you've cited him in your work. Are there any other, we're going to mention your book here in a second as we go out, your books. Are there any other authors that you would recommend to my audience? Any other books that or resources that you have found? And again, I'll let you give it your link in a second. But any kind of third-party ideas, authors, voices that you really admire in this space?
I hate most relationship experts. I want to punch in the nose, Michael, because I suffered. I was so frustrated. And I did all the things. I knew the love languages and I, read the Harwell Hendricks and the Imagos. And I was desperate. I really did try everything. And now I really get angry when I see this information that I feel is setting women back. When you go to an expert and you have that humility, I need help in this area, and you pay somebody and you buy their book or whatever, and you get the wrong thing. It's just incredibly hurtful. So for me, I'm incredibly myopic. I love John Gray, and the 6 intimacy skills have been really life-changing for me and many thousands of women all over the world. But the book or author that I think has influenced me tremendously, and just really has so much to do with how I repaired my marriage, and I've helped so many other women do the same. And because a lot of it comes down to just having courage. And Ambrose Redmoon said that courage is not the absence of fear. It's the decision that something else is more important. And so many times when I've been afraid that my husband was going to screw up and forget to pay the property taxes or crash the car or lose his job, and I chose in that moment to have faith instead of indulging my fear and my urge to control. Each time I did that, I was nurturing and supporting the intimacy in my relationship because I decided that was more important. I was making that the priority. One person who's really helped me, an author who's really helped me have so much more in that regard, is Napoleon Hill. And he's the author of Think and Grow Rich, of course, and many other books that they're less mentioned, but they're also equally powerful. One of the things that was a real turning point for me was getting to see his videos that he made in the 50s. They were on YouTube for a while. They're just incredible because he really brings you present to the power of, and the way I express it all the time is what you focus on increases. I've
excerpted some of his old recordings on this podcast before.
Oh my gosh. So you know what I'm talking about, how I just love that man. And, one of the things that he said in the video that is so moving to me is he goes, I'm doing this work now. And I've been able to, because I chose my faith over my fear. I'm paraphrasing him, but basically because he decided to control his mind, he said, I've been able to help millions of people, some of them not even born yet. And Michael, you and I weren't born when he was making those videos. And yet you and I have both been touched by that man's commitment to what I call choosing his faith over his fear. So he's been very inspirational. He's certainly influenced my work greatly. It's one of the things that we really train women to do when they come, is to focus on the outcome they want. We have what we call the spouse fulfilling prophecy, which, and we may be running out of time, but I'd love to tell a quick story about the
Sure.
spouse. So when in my early marriage, I used to tell my husband, like, see if you can get a raise, or see if you can get a better job. It'd be great if you could make more money. And then just probably down to, like, you don't make enough money, right? And I'm sure that was the subtext of my complaint. So that was what I call my spouse fulfilling prophecy, which is a term I made up about what you affirm and the evidence you seek in your life is what we call a spouse fulfilling prophecy. So I found all this evidence that he was kind of a loser pants and couldn't make very much money. We got to the point where he wasn't making any money. And then I became aware of how I wasn't controlling my mind. And I chose to reinforce a different spouse fulfilling prophecy. I chose, you've always been a good provider. And then I, just for fun, started also calling my husband Mr. Moneybags. I would say to him, and he wasn't making any money at the time, I would say, you'd always been a good provider. And I'd call him Mr. Moneybags whenever I could. Around that time, he started his own company, his video company. He's had it for well over a decade now. It's very successful. It's more successful than he ever was prior at any other job and things like that. So to this day, I still call him Mr. Moneybags. It all feels very authentic now. But I really got to see that what I focused on increased. And as I was pointing my manifestor in a direction that didn't serve me, that's what I experienced. And as soon as I adjusted my focus, that's when I got my miracle. And now we see women do that all the time. They do it around their husbands drinking. I've had women say, oh my gosh, my husband, I thought he was an alcoholic, but I'm using this SFP and he's become a light to moderate drinker. Or I had one with a temper. My husband has a terrible temper, and she had an SFP, and he's now started saying to her, it's not like me to lose my temper, is it? It's quite powerful. And I think Napoleon Hill would be proud.
One final thought from me too is, I'm going through this conversation with you. I'm not a New York Times bestselling author on relationships. I'm sure there's been some men that will listen to this and they'll say, uh-oh, I can't believe Mike is phrasing it that way. I can't believe he's saying it like that. Now, maybe I don't say everything perfectly in a space like this, but I think you can tell I'm trying to be authentic in terms of how I view things. What's interesting about this conversation is your reception is that you did not, as far as I can tell, like punch me in the gut because I went off on a side tangent or a comment or a word that didn't sound perhaps exactly how women might want to hear it. So, I appreciate that, because I do think of many of the things that I said today, I'm sure a significant portion of the female population would be like, okay, it's time to take him out back and light him on fire. However, almost 100% of men would agree with me 100%, so.
And this is the thing, and my husband has helped me validate. I'm always kind of running through things past him. Like, do men think about things like this? And he'll go, yeah. And I'll go, wow, that just blows my mind. So it's true that as women, even I'll write a blog and say, this is what men think. And as I'm writing, I'm like, that's so different from the way we view the world. I appreciate that you were being authentic with me, and I take it as high praise that I didn't take any swipes at you. Because that is, I wasn't always this way. I would have taken swipes at you pre-intimacy skills. It's kind of affected every area of my life. I appreciate very much. You have given me this wonderful gift of sharing your platform to help me get my message across that I'm incredibly passionate about. So why would I be anything but gracious to you? And you didn't say anything that offended me, is the other part of it. In fact, I was complimented that you knew my work so well. I appreciate you, Michael.
Well, thank you, Laura. Hey, the new book, The Empowered Wife, I guess it's actually a new release of that book. Is that correct?
Yeah, The Empowered Wife. Oh, well, I don't usually admit this, but I'll tell you, it's a re-release of, we changed the title. It was originally called First, Kill All the Marriage Counselors. Thank you for laughing at that.
Hey, listen, I just had an author on who has a book called, well, I shouldn't even say it, but it's the no blank hole rule. These crazy titles sometimes, I don't know, sometimes they work, right?
Well, it didn't work for my target audience. They were incredibly uncomfortable with that title. But I really wanted women to get all 6 intimacy skills laid out step by step. So I changed the title to The Empowered Wife: 6 Surprising Secrets to to attract your husband's time, attention, and affection.
Laura, the website, where's the best place if people want to go check you out for more information?
Well, I have something really fun going on right now. It's called the Get Cherished Challenge. It's at getcherished.com, kind of like got milk, right? But it's Get Cherished. If you go there, you can read a free chapter of The Empowered Wife. You can also sign up for the challenge. And every day for 5 days in a row, I will send you a little experiment you can try in your relationship. This is definitely designed for women. And it's, so I give you one of the cheat phrases. I tell you exactly when to say it and words to use, and just see what kind of response you get from your husband. We have women tell us that after using the intimacy skills for about 2 weeks, they feel like they have a new husband, and that they've got the Rosetta Stone for how to communicate with him. So these are pretty magical phrases, and I'd love for everyone to get a chance to play around with them and see if they work for them.
Laura, good stuff. It's an interesting world these days. I really feel, I mentioned my nephews, I think they're 13 and 15. These guys today, I don't know what they're going to face within the next 20 years. It's going to be an interesting, messy place, because I think generally those current 13, 15-year-old boys, I think they're probably the same as when I was, except everything else is different.
Yeah, I guess everything's different. I mean, sometimes I think one of the things that came up for me when I first learned the intimacy skills was I was really mad at my female relatives. I'm like, why didn't my mom and my grandma tell me about this, right? My mom's divorced, so she didn't clearly have this information. But looking back, I can kind of see where maybe some of the same things were playing out in the relationships of my grandparents that played out in my relationship too. So I don't know that it's getting so much different. I certainly think the gender differences that we experience now have been with us for a long, long time. And I'm happy about that, because I think it's exciting to have 2 genders. It really keeps life interesting.
Maybe it's just the accelerant of social media and whatnot is what I'm really getting at, is all these young people today have to grow up with that. So, hey, 2 genders. I don't know about that. As I said at the top, New York City's got 31. And as far as I can tell, and this might sound completely crazy, as far as I can tell, why 31? Why not 500? And I don't care if there's 500 or 31 or 2 or 6 or 20. I really don't care. I'm very liberty-based about this. People can be whatever they want to be. However, I do think it's suspicious about 31, because that kind of dovetails with Baskin-Robbins ice cream.
It does.
Yeah,
oh my gosh. So there's 31 flavors of genders.
So anyways.
Is one of them like cookies and cream, you think? Or?
I don't know. But really, I mean, I think it's okay. I really, if somebody wants to believe or have whatever perspective on gender they want to have, my gosh, go for it. I don't want to spend any of my life telling you how to do anything. It's
exactly
that's not my cup of tea. But it makes for an interesting world in relationships. That's for sure.
No, it really does. And it's very true that everyone is the expert in their own life. Like we're just here sharing our experience, and that's kind of fun. Yeah, definitely not here to tell anybody who they are or what to be or how to act, because I tried that and it was really actually very painful. I don't recommend it.
Laura, good stuff. Thank you for taking some time today.
It's been such a pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Michael.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.